What's underneath the beanie, Kevin? You really want to know? You really want to know? You happy now? Here we go, we got your boy Axel. You might have mentioned this before, but did you reserve a Steam Deck? Do you see it replacing the Switch as your go-to handheld for indie games, or will the Switch continue being your primary for first party and indie? First off, yes, I did reserve a Steam Deck. I think I'm in the first wave of ones that are being delivered. I'm not entirely clear. I know a lot of the delivery windows have been very strange. If I'm not the first wave, I'm the second one. As far as how it goes for indie games, a lot of this is just going to come down to what the experience of using the Steam Deck is like, to be honest. Given the Switch's smaller size, I think I'd actually be more interested in still using that for indie titles as long as they can run fine on the Switch. If it's an indie title that is particularly more demanding and it's a situation where, you know, the Switch is struggling to do 30 FPS, but on the Steam Deck I could do 60 frames on the go, then yeah, I might be more tempted to swap over for that. But otherwise, I really do see the Switch as being more of my mainline handheld system that I rely on for those first-party Nintendo titles, of course, but also those third-party indie ones that are available on multiple platforms. Steam Deck I am very interested in, but in a lot of ways, I kind of treat it almost more like I would playing the Game Gear back in the day. Like, I remember growing up with the Game Boy and the Game Gear, and the Game Boy was a system that I actually played walking around with, and it was something that I had portably on the go, whereas the Game Gear was something that I sat down on a chair near a power outlet and plugged it in. Now, the Steam Deck battery life isn't really that much worse than the Switch, but because of its larger size and all those kind of things to keep in mind, I just really see it being something that I'm playing more as a stationary system that I can easily carry around, and not something I'm going to necessarily play walking down the street or on a plane. But who knows though, this is just based on what little info we have right now, and having no actual hands-on with it, I am very excited for it to release along with a lot of other handhelds this holiday season and early next year. So once I get my hands on it, then we'll kind of see how that play with the Switch happens. That said, one thing I do really want to heavily emphasize, I don't really view the Steam Deck as a direct competitor to the Switch. Yes, they are both handhelds that allow you to play games on the go, and there are certainly going to be those games that are available on both of them, but just given the difference in size, pricing, everything like that, I just don't see them as direct competitors. Sure, there are some people who are going to maybe choose between one or the other, but I don't think that's going to be like an audience-wide thing, because at the end of the day, especially for the Switch, I think what really appeals about the Switch the most isn't just that it's a handheld with Nintendo first-party stamp on it. A lot of its major first-party games are really have gotten a lot of people's attention, and no matter how much more powerful the Steam Deck can be, it's not going to have that option, outside of emulation, but that's a little more of a specialist field. I don't own a Switch yet. Do you think I should buy the OLED version? I'm unsure because I've heard that the regular Switch struggles with performance on some more demanding titles, and the OLED has the same internals. This has been honestly such a mess of a conversation lately. Look, first off, absolutely the Switch does struggle with certain games, but I do feel like some people talk about it to the extent as if it's, you know, a toaster playing everything at 10 FPS, and it's not. Yes, there are absolutely some games that do struggle. A really big example of this recently was Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I haven't started No More Heroes 3 yet, but I heard the frame rate can be a little bit of a mess there too. But here's the thing, right? People are complaining about the frame rates on there, and still overall well reviewing these games and putting lots of hours into them and experiencing them. Yes, the frame rate problems can be a bummer, but clearly they haven't been bad enough to where people are completely swearing off the system or the games themselves. So with that in mind, yeah, I think the Switch is a fantastic handheld. I think it has a great library. Would I love to have a more powerful version of it at some point so you can stabilize those frame rates? Sure, but at the end of the day, I'd still rather play them than not at all. As for whether or not you should get an OLED version, yes, I think so. One of the things I kind of talked about when the OLED was revealed was that I don't think it's a great option for people that already own a Switch and want to upgrade, because you're not getting that much extra for buying a whole new MSRP system. But if you don't have any Switch at all and you're looking to get one, for $50 more, the better kickstand, the bigger screen, OLED, I think is worth it. I think that is the way to go now if you don't have a Switch at all. How do you feel about the new PS5 having less cooling? Honestly, I don't know fully what to think right now, because there's really just been the one video that's been blowing up, which was Austin's, and I haven't gotten a new model on hand for myself yet to really mess around and test with. I will say that based on what Austin showed in his video and stuff that I've been seeing from other people that have started to get early units, it seems like yes, it does have a smaller heatsink, but in terms of how that's actually impacting performance, It's not really at all. It's entirely likely and possible that Sony over-engineered the cooling system for the launch models. It ended up being more than they needed to, and so toned it down later ones in order to cut costs and also up production to have more units available for this holiday season. I mean, this is kind of like what happened with the original Xbox One. The original Xbox One was huge because after the red ring issues on the 360, Microsoft did everything they could to have this super cooled system. And it was more than they needed it to be, eventually leading to the Xbox One S, which was a much smaller design because, yeah, it didn't need that over-the-top of cooling. So again, I haven't done any on-hand tests myself, but based on stuff that I'm seeing coming out of other resources that are using it, Digital Foundry actually just did a post talking about getting their hands on, and they haven't done thermal tests yet on how hot the processors are getting, but based on at least gameplay, it really looks like that smaller heatsink is not impacting performance at all. This is also still kind of an emerging news situation, so my thoughts on this might change as we learn more, but as of right now, I definitely think some people are making it a way bigger deal than it actually is. Beanie merch when? Shank, every time you ask this, I'm pushing it back another 2 months. Not really, I'm just not looking to do it right now. I'm focusing on videos, man. Let me just make videos right now. What's one game that you weren't expecting to love as much as you did? Okay, this plays into last year very easily, Yakuza Like a Dragon. I had always known about the Yakuza series, and other people had told me so many times why I needed to play them and check them out and blah, 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 but I never really tried them actually, and a large part of that was because I think I was a little intimidated by the fact that, you know, I'm learning about the series when there's like 7 games already out, and that's a lot of catch-up work to do. But I ended up trying out Like a Dragon because, full honesty, it was actually a game I got early access to when the Series X was releasing, and that one being a JRPG made it extra appealing to me, and having a new main character, so I was able to kind of play it fresh and not be worried about experiencing the whole franchise. And I fell in love with that game and that universe so hard. Since then, I picked up the next-gen version of Judgment and finished that. I am very looking forward to Lost Judgment later this year. I am currently, right now, I'm actually just finishing Yakuza 0, and I'm going to start moving on to all the other mainline ones with Kiwami, Kiwami 2, the HD remasters. I want to play through this whole franchise now because that intimidated me in the past, but man, do I love these games now. Is backwards compatibility on consoles an important feature to you? Why or why not? To me, yes. This is one of those things where it's a weird situation to talk about because I think backwards compatibility is a very important feature from the standpoint of preservation and keeping accessibility to games that people have from older systems, all that kind of good stuff. But at the same time, I totally understand the very businessy stance of like, well, yes, people ask for this feature, but it's not really a thing they need because at the end of the day, they'll still buy the new consoles, which is true. So I very heavily enjoy the fact that, for instance, Xbox has been very forward with trying to open up more backwards compatibility on their systems. I like that the PS5 has PS4 support, although I wish it did a little more than just that. I am very, very big on the idea of making sure old classic stuff is available for people that play stuff today. And so I very much care about backwards compatibility. And if it doesn't exist, I hope that in kind of return for that, companies start to focus more and more on porting some of the bigger classics to make sure that they are available. After the Switch OLED and Steam Deck announcement, could you see Sony bringing back the PSP? Nope, I really want them to, but I don't think Sony is currently interested in doing a handheld again. I mean, my dream scenario is Sony announces a new portable, whatever they want to call it. You could do the Vita 2, you could do a whole new name, you could do some kind of PSP nameplay, but I would love to have something that kept the PS3, PS Vita store alive, so you had access to all those digital games, especially the PS1 era ones, along with whatever new content was made for that handheld. That, to me, is the dream scenario, a way for Sony to really kind of keep their older systems alive while still focusing on the PS5 and PS4 as their sort of mainline home console option. I heavily doubt it'll actually happen, but I would celebrate so hard if it did. What is a game you wish you could play for the first time all over again? Oh, that is a good question. I feel like there's a better answer though. What is there? Steve, you gave me a stumper. This is one I do need to think about. I can get there. I can find my way there. You know what? Actually, okay, no. All right. A game that I would love to experience for the first time, and maybe this is a bit of a monkey's paw thing because it's also an older game, so maybe if I didn't have the nostalgia, it wouldn't hit quite as hard. But Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. That is one of my favorite games, but part of why I really like that game is because of how it just sort of drops you in the setting, and there is so much to explore and learn about with this really well-designed place, especially for when it was made. It's just such an interesting world that now I feel like I have a really good grasp of, and the idea of being able to explore it all over again for the first time would be really cool. Are there any retro third-party peripherals that stand out to you that you'd like to see modernized? Talking like Mad Catz, Honeybee, Performance, etc. I've messed with a lot of different weird controllers from older systems, and I found ways of making them work on modern systems as well, just to kind of mess around with them and see how they do. And I really do think the one controller that stands out the most to me as something that I would love to see a new spin on is the Negicon. This is a controller that was released by Namco on the original PlayStation, and the whole concept of it is that it has a center part you can twist by just moving the controls this way. I did a video messing around with it, and it honestly gave me a way more interesting and different way of playing games, especially racers. I think it ended up making a lot of sense in. Something I've talked about a few times in the past is how I feel like controllers used to be a lot more experimental, and now we've hit a phase where we're getting controllers that are overall very well balanced and designed and do a great job of being sort of one-size-fits-all approaches for multiple types of games. But there are certain weird designs that end up working better for specific cases, and I think the Negicon is one of those things. And so if we were to get some kind of updated new version or a controller that used that same kind of mechanic, I think that would be really cool to see. Your recent video on the 3DS and DS line as a whole got me wondering, what is your preferred method of playing original DS games? Do you prefer one of their older models, or do you use your 3DS as an all-in-one for the DS line? I think all the models have pros and cons to one another, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I generally walk a line of I enjoy simplicity. I understand there are sometimes games that are best experienced in a very specific manner. For instance, let's say with a lot of older retro games, I like having the option to hook them up to a modern TV that just simplifies the whole thing and lets me incorporate into a regular setup. Yes, there are upsides to playing that stuff on original CRT hardware where it actually might look even better because it was designed for that kind of display, but at the end of the day, simplicity works out for me. So the way that it ends up working with the DS is I primarily use a 3DS XL for everything. There are upsides. I've already used some older systems, but I just like having the option to have just one main little handheld that does all of that. The same applies to the original Game Boy as well. I just use a Game Boy SP to play all of my Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. I just like having the largest library possible on one platform. That's really the thing that sells it for me. Do you care about specs such as terabytes, teraflops, FPS, etc., or care more about just the game and how playable it is? At the end of the day, personally, yes, I really just care more about how a game itself is designed and that it runs stably. Like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna have problems if performance-wise the game is running at 10 frames per second and it's inconsistent and it's a mess everywhere. Then it's a problem. But when it comes to things like really fighting over, oh, well, this version of the game gets, 2 more FPS on average, or this one you can see a little bit more graphical problems here, and reflections, I don't care. It's stuff that I do talk about and cover in my videos because I think there are people out there who care about that and it's good information to give them. But for me personally, at the end of the day, it's just never been a thing that impacted which version of a game I would buy or whether or not I drive fun with it. As long as the game runs in a stable way that I can experience it, it's much more about the game itself. Good art direction for me easily wins out over a high frame rate or high resolution, though I will absolutely take both if those an option to have along with it. And even when it comes to things like fun gameplay versus meticulously well-balanced gameplay, fun wins out for me. So yeah, I'm not gonna say that that stuff is not important at all, it just isn't the thing that make or breaks stuff for me. If someone wanted to get into JRPGs, what are some of the best games to start with? I think I might have answered this a couple times before, but I feel like I can always just give more options for people to choose from. One thing that I think is important to highlight is looking at games that are currently available on modern systems. There are a lot of classics that people are going to talk up sometimes and really say, oh yeah, I gotta play this, but that runs in the issue of the game isn't actually available anywhere and requires either piracy or for you to try and hunt down an old system that is just not exactly affordable. So with that in mind, I think some of the modern ones that are really worth taking a look, depending on the type of game you're into, I think Dragon Quest XI is a really awesome intro if you want something something that has kind of the style of an older JRPG, but is updated for a current system. I think it walks a terrific balance of that. On the Switch, Fire Emblem Three Houses is a really good choice for something that is a tactics game, but also offers a little bit of the kind of school simulation thing, which isn't really indicative of the whole series, but it works really well in that particular game. And then if we are going to talk retro classics, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about major JRPGs and not talk about Final Fantasy, which thankfully, relative to a lot of the other franchises out there, has a lot of their games available digitally on modern systems. You can't go wrong with their run of PS1 games with Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. They've been doing the pixel remasters on PC at least for now, which hopefully come to Switch. And of course, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, while not really true to, traditional JRPG, I actually think it does a really good job of updating it. I would recommend playing the original first if you can, but I think 7 Remake is also still a solid game if you don't mind mixing in a little more real-time action with it. As we get closer to the release of Metroid Dread, will this increase momentum for more Metroid? Whether it be re-releases of the GBA games, or can we finally see the Prime Trilogy come to Switch? Man, I hope so. This has been a whole weird thing with Nintendo lately. They've been hyping up Metroid Dread a lot more than I think a lot of people thought they would. Nintendo has a history of kind of releasing Metroid games, sweeping them under the rug a little bit. Like back when we got Samus Returns on the 3DS, there was like a short celebration, but they still didn't really advertise it all that heavily. Dread, though, on social media, it's been nonstop. They've done all these different trailers for it. They've done celebrations of past Metroid games, kind of trying to keep people engaged in what the whole series is. And what's really frustrating about that is they're talking about all these other great games in the Metroid franchise that people can't actually play on their Switch. You either have to hunt down a copy of Samus Returns for your 3DS, or start hunting down more games like for the GBA, or in the case of the Prime series, GameCube and Wii. I would absolutely love a Prime Trilogy update for the Switch. This has been a very long rumored thing that has been brought up so many times. People keep speculating it every time, especially as 4 keeps getting pushed back, so it's like, hey, oh, maybe they release Trilogy just in time for 4. I don't really know how much stock to put into that. I would love to see them make these games available again, but with Nintendo, it's just very hard to tell. Sometimes you get a trilogy of classic games on a modern system, sometimes you get a single game remade with a little extra love and care, and sometimes there's just no remake or port at all, and you just have to deal with either hunting down an older copy or never playing it.